All right, everybody, welcome back to the deWiz Golf YouTube channel. Another coaches webinar series that we have today, and a conversation that I'm really excited to have. We've been trying to set this up for a while. Ian Clark joins us from outside of London, the Ian Clark Golf Academy, and one of our heaviest deWiz users. I'm constantly looking at the user report, and Ian is always up there as one of the top users of deWiz, and we're very excited to have him today on the channel. Ian, first off, thanks as always for taking the time to join us here. And for people that may not be, familiar with you and your background, just give us a quick, little synopsis about your coaching history, your career, and what you have going on at your academy.
And it's really good to talk to you, Stan. We've been trying to do this for a little while, so it's good that we finally got it done. I'm a full-time coach. I'm based in my own golf academy, like we said, just outside of London. Been here now 23 years. It's a shame no one else will have me, but it looks like I'm rooted here for the time being. I've always coached full time. I've never sort of gone down the club professional route, anything like that. Many years ago, I went and worked full time out in Dubai, where I really got stuck into sort of full time coaching, and then really came back working here since then, and just trying to improve my coaching all the time. I'm heavily influenced by people like Martin Hall. Obviously, Martin's a heavy deWiz user. Lots of other guys on the top 50 list, like Mike Adams, James Lights, Sean Foley, and I've had the opportunity. I'm very fortunate really to have studied and learned from a lot of these guys to sort of form my own framework as to how I coach now. And deWiz was just something, just from a feedback point of view, that I've been looking for ages. I honestly just about given up on trying to get people to video their swing. It just seemed too difficult to do for whatever reason. So deWiz just came along at exactly the right time. So it's just integrated itself perfectly into my own coaching framework.
You kind of got right into my next question here, because that's one thing that I hear a lot from coaches as, they're asking for best practices for them to use in their coaching, just trying to find ways to get started. And so when you think back to, when you first got your deWiz in hand and, you may have used it in the first lesson or two, what were some things that you started off using deWiz for? And now as you've, progressed for, 8-9 months using it, how do you incorporate it into an individual lesson?
So the beauty of it is, because of the amount of different data points it now measures, it honestly depends on what you're working on with that particular individual. I suppose a good example would be swing length. So, if you've got a player, say, with a 7-iron whose swing is looking too short, it's just great to set the parameters that we need to crank this up 20 more centimeters. And then they can play around with the deWiz and then find what that 20 centimeters feels like to them. And then I would send them away with the idea of, look, in your practice, we've got to make sure, for example, let's go from 100 centimeters to 120 centimeters. And now they're working with much more of a purpose. It's actually really helped students' practice sessions, because they don't feel they're just going away working on the same thing incorrectly. They now at least are practicing with far more of a purpose. So it's really just setting each student a particular benchmark for whatever it is that you're working on with them during that particular lesson. The inclusion of the IDDX and the IDDY numbers has really been a game changer. That's just giving people such a different feel. I think it's a comment Martin has always said, it puts the real in your field. So now you can get an idea of, wow, that's what that feels like. My goodness me, that's so different. But at least it's now measurable. So the student sounds terrible, but can be trusted to practice on their own a little bit without getting it all in a bit of a muddle.
I'm glad you mentioned that first part about, individualizing it based on the student that you're working with, because that is one thing that I try to get through to our general user base, not necessarily coaches, but, our customers and our deWiz users is, I tell people, don't try to focus on all of the data points at one time. Whenever you're doing something in your practice, there's always one specific thing that you're working on. So you take that data point, and that's what, this today at the range, I'm going to work on my backswing length, or I'm going to work on my transition. And a lot of people seem to get caught up sometimes in trying to examine all of the different numbers at one time, and it gets a little overwhelming. Do you ever experience that when working with the students, or are you just more, you're in control, you're focusing on what it is that you want to focus on that day. Because I do find that sometimes when I'm talking to people, people seem to get a little overwhelmed at times when they try to look at it from a holistic approach and try to look at all the numbers at one time.
Definitely couldn't agree more. It's I'm quite fortunate because I'm a TrackMan user. So up on my wall here, I've got the TrackMan. So obviously that thing, as I say to all my students, that shows us whatever it is, 34 different data points. And in the course of a lesson, we may only be looking at one or two. Maybe we're just looking at face angle and club power. So we use deWiz in the same way. Yes, we've got these 14 data points on deWiz, but today we're focusing on this one or this one. Let's not try and bombard them. Probably the last thing a student needs is more information. They nearly all have too much information going on as it is. We've got to just make sure that it's focusing on the one or two key points. I can't remember who said it, but I think someone said something along the lines of when you're looking for a needle in a haystack, the first rule is don't add more hay. You know, just easy on what you're doing, focus on the one or two things and just get really good at that. When you're happy, let's say with swing length, then we can move on to maybe some tempo readings or the IDDX number. But yeah, it's very easy to, oh my God, I need to work on that and that and that. And yeah, you've got to do it one at a time.
Recently, I've been contacting a lot of our coaches. I shared with you the new data findings that we put together based on player handicap, our professional data that we've gathered. And you were one of the first ones to get back to me and say, you know, can I print this out and have it, you know, in my studio that I can show to people? So I'd like to kind of touch on that a little bit. How much do you use kind of those benchmarks and those baselines that we have found in the averages, and how much is it, you know, like we talked about, on that individual basis of, all right, I know this player's backswing length is too short, instead of, you know, maybe looking at these averages, let's try to work you gradually. So how much are you incorporating kind of those baselines into, you know, what your goals for your students are?
I mean, I suppose I use them as necessary on an as and when needed basis. You can't see it in the corner, but I have a poster on the wall there. So sadly, most of my students can't miss it when they walk in, but it's purely just that. It's a benchmark. It's a reference. It's the majority of my students tend to be male of a certain age who maybe aren't moving as mobile as, let's say, Bryson. So we're hardly going to compare them with Bryson's swing length and his speed, but I think it's good information to give to a golfer that, look, the reason why Bryson's hitting it X distance is because he swings it really long, really quick. And the reason why your ball's going where it's going is because your swing's a bit shorter than that and it's a bit slower than that. So we need to maybe just ramp it up a bit. But yeah, we're not going to pin them down until they can actually copy some of the tour player data. But certainly as a comparative, I think it's super helpful. Again, it's like the TrackMan averages. They're just benchmarks. Not everyone's going to be able to do that, but it just gives us a bit of an idea as to what we're working towards.
I wanted to touch with you about is I've actually been in communication with some of your students, Ken Kane being one of them, who went and worked with you and then ended up going on and buying a deWiz himself. And that is one thing that I've seen a lot from your users. So what's kind of been your, you know, feedback that you've received from the users and their, you know, desire to then go and get a deWiz? Because I've seen that a lot from your students.
Sure. I think absolutely the latter of what you said. I don't force it onto anyone. We use it in the lesson because the product's so good. It creates some curiosity. It creates interest. It's obviously so easy to use. People can see when I use it, put the watch on, the app's on, it's within seconds, it's working. Some of the issue we've had, certainly some of the technology I've used as a coach, and I'm quite heavy on force mats. We've got Hack Motion, we've got TrackMan, KVS. It's got to be simple, it's got to be quick, and it's got to be easy to use. If it suddenly gets a bit glitchy in the software, you're just going to have to bail on the lesson because obviously you've got to look after the student in front of you. So beauty of deWiz is, touch wood, it's pretty good in the lesson. It doesn't let me down. It works and it does what it needs to do. And the student is, you know, their curiosity now is pricked a little bit by this and they want to know a bit more about it. And they can just see the benefits. It's the feedback. That's what I'm a big believer in, is if you're practicing with no feedback, I think it's just exercise. I don't think it's practice. You could be hitting hundreds and hundreds of balls, but without any feedback, you don't really know what you're doing. So I was always really keen, as I said at the start, can we video the swing? Can we check it? And that was just proving to be too difficult for people. So the deWiz has really helped with that. I think people just see the benefits of it straight away themselves. It sounds a bit blasé, but it doesn't really need much selling. If someone's keen on wanting to get better, and they want to have a better way of utilizing their time. I think that's the big thing with it. I think a half-hour session with deWiz is way more beneficial than 2 hours without it. So time is spent better just getting that great feedback. So yeah, honestly, it really sort of sells itself.
Ian, thanks again so much for taking the time to do this. I'll just kind of leave you with this here. If people in the London area are interested, in coming to your facility, learning more about deWiz, working with you, where can people find you? Social media, website, where can people find more information about Ian Clark Golf?
Yeah, so the easiest way is my website, just ianclarkgolf.co.uk. I'm on Twitter, that's Ian Clark Golf, and I'm on Instagram, and my marketing team did really well with this. That's Ian Clark Golf as well. So they kept that all nice and simple.
Ian Clark, thanks again for joining the deWiz YouTube channel. Thanks for all of your support, and we look forward to working a lot with you in the future.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks again for what you guys are doing.